In this video, I want to talk about how to handle some common objections found in final expense sales conversations. Before I kind of go into sort of showing through some of these, I want to emphasize that it's the actual process of thinking through common objections and documenting them and practicing them is far more important than actually, what's in this particular document or memorizing what's in my document. So, and you will actually be in a better position to come up with, using this methodology, a really effective objections document. And I keep saying document because it's really important in my mind to document these things, because too often experienced salespeople will tell you, "Oh, I'm really good at thinking on my feet," and ultimately, no one's really good at thinking on their feet, right? And so when you encounter an objection, you're going to be thrown off, right? You're going to be thrown off your sales process. You're going to be thrown off your sales script. You're going to be thrown off sort of moving through that straight line to an effective commitment, right? So you will inherently be thrown off if you don't practice and if you don't document these. So the most obvious is, whenever I'm doing sales calls, I have, good old-fashioned paper and pencil. And if I encounter an objection or I stumble or I didn't say things, perfectly, I will document that either on the call while I'm kind of working through it, or oftentimes afterwards. I'll scribble that down real quick. I won't necessarily process it. I won't I don't want to dwell on that call. I don't want to worry about that I didn't say it exactly right. But later, I want to go back to my objections document. You should have a document, Google Docs, Notion, whatever you want to use, and have an objections document where you actually put down objections that you hear, right? And the way you want to handle that, or the way you wanted to handle that, right? Where you can sit and you can think through, like, why did they have that objection? Why did they think that, right? Because the process of doing that will help you to give, a better response in the future, right? Because we've all had that experience, right? We were probably in a different context, right? You were in an argument or whatever, and it's like, oh, I should have said that, right? Or you were in a debate, and I should have said that. Or you were trying to advocate for something, and you were like, oh, I should have said it this way, right? So that's what this document's for. It's for you to go later, and even after, so from time to time when you're training, or maybe you're going through a tough spot and you're not really closing at the rate that you're used to or whatever. This is a great training document too, just to refresh your mind, right, about some things that you'll hear. So let's go through this real quick. I'll put a link to this in the description so you can pull through and kind of review this, use it as your own training document, copy and paste it, and turn it into the start of your own. But again, I really advocate you thinking through some objections that you hear often, because like I said, you're going to be better positioned. I don't sell final expense every day, but I do sell a lot of stuff, right? And I have been a salesperson for a long time, so I have an approach to this. And so when we're talking about leads, these are the things that I'm hearing, and also just kind of thinking through the product. So even if you're a new final expense salesperson, you can do this just as easily, right? And you can find some resources off the internet. And you could build some of your own documents, and again, just get your thinking started. So let's go through a couple of these. Cost. Hey, final expense is too expensive. This is one, no matter what you're selling, you're going to have a cost objection, right? And the best way to sort of overcome that is really just to acknowledge that, and then just let them know that, hey, there generally is a way that we can structure products to make them more affordable, or we can look for a particular type of policy that works. In the case of final expense, it's just structured for folks that are going to have challenges with cost, right? And that's why final expense is here. So in the particular case of cost and final expense, that's kind of why the product is there, is because generally they don't have the means to do more expensive life insurance and those sorts of things. So they need a very specific, affordable insurance. So again, I kind of walked through all that. Again, you want to tighten that down, obviously. But when that first document, you just want to kind of just put the objection down, think through what they're going to say, and then possibly the way that you would respond to it. Once you've kind of done this exercise, thinking through like what they're going to say, at the highest level, kind of what's your response to that, or what's the sort of the logical process that you want them to understand. Then you kind of go through and do this second run where you're actually starting to script it out, right? And when you're scripting it out, there's some very specific pieces to the framework when you're scripting objections, right? So the first thing is you want to acknowledge the objection. You also want to make them feel comfortable asking questions, raising objections, because the worst thing that you want, as I always say, is for them to hold back objections in their brain and not say them because they feel uncomfortable or intimidated. So the first time they have an objection, you really want to get them very comfortable of, hey, yeah, that's a great question. Definitely throughout this, process and this discussion, ask questions, raise any concerns that you have so that we can kind of talk through them, because you can't overcome objections that are in their head. And a lot of times if they're not talking, they're just layering them up, right? They've got 1, 2, 3, 5 objections that are in their head, and they've already put up those barriers, and there's no way for you to deal with it because you have no idea what they are. They're just sitting there stone silent. That's like the worst sort of situation that I want to be in. I want them to be talking to me. I want them to be objecting. I want them to be sharing with me their concerns. I want them to be sharing with me their disbeliefs, right? The things that they think or assumptions that they come in with. So again, you're going to acknowledge, you're going to sort of overcome, or you're going to correct that misperception. You're going to educate. You're going to kind of tell them the alternative, but again, not in a way to make them feel like their question was inappropriate. It's like, hey, a lot of people have that question. Yeah, I understand that, budgeting and sort of watching your costs is super, important. So again, you want to acknowledge, you want them to feel like it's normal. A lot of people ask me that question. A lot of people have that concern. A lot of people have that misperception, right? And then you want to overcome, right? You want to handle that objection in a good way, make them feel confident, get them sort of shaking their head. Don't leave that objection until you get some sort of commitment that they understand, and they are adjusting their view, right, before you kind of move on. And then within your script, you want to have the pivot point where you then go back into your sales process and you go back into your sales script. So a lot of times the way these kind of work, especially in training and sometimes even in the sales itself, is you have these lists of objections, you have kind of this process that you're going through with sales in your presentation, and you want to kind of use those together. So I am going through my presentation, here's an objection, oh, what is that objection? Here it is. I kind of overcome it, get their trust, their confidence, and then pivot back in and continue in my process. So I want to keep my sales presentation as linear and straight as possible, but I'm going to wander in and out of those objections, but I always want to make sure that I pivot back. But I don't want to pivot back until I get some sort of acknowledgement that I'm starting to sort of adjust their framework for listening to the rest of the presentation. So if they're stuck there, I really can't go past that until they're unstuck. Otherwise, everything I say after that is worthless. So I've got to at least open their mind, get a little bit of acknowledgement that, okay, I understand, I'll listen, I'm not quite convinced, but some sort of acknowledgement that you've kind of got your foot in the door, right? And so there's a bunch here, right? Existing coverage, health exam required. A lot of these, particularly in final expense, are just misconceptions, right? Or things that they have associated with final expense or just life insurance in general, and they don't realize that final expense is sort of a special category and a very useful tool for folks that have encountered some limitations in more traditional or common insurance, right? And so this is super helpful to kind of list through these and document them. So hopefully this has been helpful. Again, the framework is far more important. You can look at this document, you can get started on some common objections and sort of how to overcome them specifically, but start to build a document like this and start to build a framework where you're practicing through and you're thinking through the best way to handle these things before you get them. And then every time, and you will get situations where you will run into something unexpected, or it is expected, but you sort of handled it, or you realize that you haven't practiced that particular one enough to make it feel natural, and you want to document that. So one of the best ways, of course, to get all of this sort of tuned in is age leads, right? It's a really low cost, low risk way to get a bunch of at-bats, right? The only way this gets better is that you actually practice the craft. So getting 100 or so of these for $100 is a really easy way to get a whole bunch of practice in and hear a lot of objections and practice overcoming them and getting really good for essentially no risk. The benefit to using age leads versus just sort of generally cold calling or something like that, or even door knocking without actual age leads, is because age leads, people have actually raised their hand, they've gone on the internet, they submitted a form, they said that they're interested in final expense. So when you make that call, there's at least some expressed interest, or they've had a conversation with someone about final expense. So these are going to be even better sort of practices than role playing with your buddy, or just, again, cold calling in your neighborhood, or trying to get enough referrals to get enough at-bats to get good. Last thing you want to do is waste a referral on your practice, right? Until you've practiced this several times, you feel super comfortable with all of these different objections. That's when you're hoping you get your referrals, right? Because you don't want to practice on referrals ideally. So a lot of times we flip this backwards. So we'll come into a new company, or we'll sell a different kind of life insurance, and they're like, hey, grab all your friends and family and call them. Well, that's kind of the worst thing you want to do, because you're practicing on your friends and family, right? And those are the people that are probably most likely or have the highest probability to actually convert. So go ahead, practice on all these anonymous people. It'll lower your anxiety, super affordable. You get a whole bunch of at-bats for nearly no cost. So super encourage you to kind of go that route and try these things. Grab the link and start building your own objections document.